How much is a mother's love worth? To James, Sarah, and David, their mother was worth absolutely nothing. Just a burden to be discarded on a lonely dirt road in the Alabama wilderness. They drove away smiling, thinking they had finally solved their problem. But here is the $4.2 million secret that is about to ruin their lives. Inside that battered old suitcase they carelessly tossed into the dirt next to her, there wasn't just old clothes. Hidden beneath the rags was exactly $4,200,000 in cold, hard cash. They abandoned a fortune to save a few pennies, and they left a survivor who is about to teach them the most brutal lesson of their lives. Hello, my friends. This is the story of Eleanor, and trust me, you are not prepared for the justice that is coming. Before we witness this karma unfold, please hit that like button if you believe that greedy people always dig their own graves. And tell me in the comments where in the world you are tuning in from. Because there are some stories that, no matter how painful, simply need to be told. The silence in the house on the morning of July 23rd was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the echoes of 40 years of ungrateful ghosts. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, her arthritic fingers tracing the hollow indentation on the mattress where her husband, Arthur, used to sleep. For decades, this home had been a factory of noise and needs. James demanding his ironed shirts, Sarah crying over broken dolls, David screaming for attention. Eleanor had given pieces of herself to them until she felt paper-thin, transparent. Now, at 72, she realized she hadn't just aged. She had faded. She was no longer a person to the world, but a relic, a dusty piece of furniture that occupied too much space. As she looked at her reflection, the white hair, the map of wrinkles, she didn't see an old woman. She saw a bank vault that had been looted and left open, its treasures taken by the very people she had birthed. She sat up slowly in bed, feeling every one of her 72 years weighing on her hunched back. Her wrinkled hands, marked by decades of hard work, clung to the edge of the mattress as she stood up. Eleanor walked toward the small mirror hanging on the wall and paused for a moment to observe her own reflection. The face looking back at her from the other side of the glass barely resembled the radiant woman in the photographs. Her hair, once black as night, was now completely white, pulled back in a messy bun. Wrinkles furrowed her skin like rivers on an old map, each line telling a different story of her life. The lines on her forehead spoke of eternal worries. Those around her eyes of tears shed in silence, those around her mouth of smiles faked to hide the pain. "Good morning, Eleanor," she whispered to herself, as she had done every morning for the last 5 years since her husband Arthur passed away. Speaking aloud, even if only to herself, made her feel less alone in that house that seemed emptier and colder every day, despite the suffocating heat of the southern summer. Eleanor dressed with care, choosing a simple floral dress she had bought years ago at a thrift store. She put it on with slow, deliberate movements, buttoning each button with trembling fingers that no longer obeyed with the precision of before. She put on her most comfortable shoes, those brown loafers that were so worn they barely had any sole left, but fit her swollen feet perfectly. As she got ready, her thoughts inevitably flew to her children. James, the eldest at 48, Sarah, the middle child at 45, and David, the youngest at 42. How much time had passed since the last time she saw them all together? 3 months? 4? Time had become blurry for Eleanor. The days blended into one another in a haze of loneliness and waiting. She went down the stairs carefully, holding onto the banister as if her life depended on it. Each step was a challenge. Every movement reminded her that her body was no longer the same. When she finally reached the kitchen, she prepared her usual breakfast, a cup of weak coffee and a slice of toast. It wasn't much, but it was all her small social security check allowed. While she drank her coffee, sitting at the kitchen table where her whole family once gathered for meals, Eleanor couldn't stop looking at the phone hanging on the wall. Would it ring today? Would her children call to ask how she was? Hope was a faint flame that refused to be extinguished completely in her heart, despite countless disappointments. The phone didn't ring during breakfast. It didn't ring while she washed her single cup and single plate. It didn't even ring when she sat in her favorite chair by the window, where she spent hours looking out at the street, watching how families in the neighborhood walked together, laughing, hugging, sharing moments that she could only remember as distant echoes of her own life. Eleanor remembered when her children were small, when this same house resonated with laughter and shouts of joy. She remembered how James, her firstborn, used to run through these hallways playing superhero with a cape made of an old sheet tied around his neck. She remembered how Sarah, her only daughter, would sit on her lap while she brushed her long brown hair, talking non-stop about her dreams of becoming a ballerina. And she remembered how David, her baby, would cling to her leg every morning crying because he didn't want her to go to work. Where had all that gone? At what moment had those loving children transformed into distant, cold adults who barely remembered her? Eleanor's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the phone. Her heart leaped with excitement as she rose quickly from her chair, too quickly for her arthritic knees. Feeling a pang of pain she completely ignored in her haste to answer. "Hello," she answered, with an anxious voice, almost breathless. "Mom, it's me," James said, the voice on the other end of the line. It was a deep, serious voice, the kind of voice Eleanor imagined he used in his important business meetings. Her eldest son was a successful man, or at least that's what he had told her. He worked in finance, had a big house in the suburbs, a luxury car, everything money could buy. "James, my love, what a joy to hear you," exclaimed Eleanor, feeling tears beginning to form in her eyes. It was pathetic, she knew, to get so emotional over a simple phone call, but she couldn't help it. "How are you, son? And Monica and the kids?" "Everyone okay," Mom replied James with a tone that sounded rushed, impatient. "Listen, I don't have much time. I'm calling because Sarah, David, and I were talking, and well, we've made a decision." Eleanor's heart beat faster. A decision. What kind of decision? For a moment, she allowed hope to bloom in her chest. Maybe they had decided to visit her more often. Maybe they wanted her to spend the next holidays with them. Maybe, what decision, my love? She asked with a trembling voice. "Mom, Sarah found a very good nursing home, a place where they can take care of you better than you can take care of yourself now. A place where you'll be with people your age, where you'll have company all the time." The words fell on Eleanor like buckets of ice water. A nursing home. They wanted to send her to a nursing home. But I'm fine here in my house, she managed to say, feeling her throat close up. "This is my house, James. It's the house where you all grew up, where your father and I—" "Mom, you can't live alone anymore," interrupted James firmly. "The other day, Mrs. Johnson called me worried because she saw you stumbling in the garden. She said you almost fell. What if you fall and there's no one to help you? What if something happens to you?" "It was just a dizzy spell, nothing more," protested Eleanor weakly. "It was very hot that day, and I forgot to drink enough water. It doesn't matter, Mom." "The decision is final," James interrupted sharply. "We've already made the decision. All three of us agree. We'll come to pick you up tomorrow morning. Pack only the essentials. There isn't much space in those places. See you tomorrow, James. Wait, please. Can we talk about this?" But the line was already dead. Her son had hung up without even saying goodbye properly, without telling her, "I love you," without giving her the chance to express her feelings, her fears, her desires. Eleanor stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the phone against her ear, as if she could still hear her son's voice on the other side. The tears she had been holding back finally began to roll down her wrinkled cheeks, leaving damp trails on her skin. A nursing home. The phrase resonated in her mind like a death sentence. Eleanor had heard stories about those places, places where old folks were left to be forgotten, where they spent their last days staring at white walls, waiting for visits that never came, counting the days until death finally liberated them from their loneliness. "No," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the silent house. "I won't go. This is my house. They can't force me." But even as she pronounced those words, Eleanor knew the truth. Her children could force her. They were adults with careers, with power, with resources. She was just an old woman with no money, no options, no voice. If they had decided she would go to a nursing home, then she would go, whether she liked it or not. Eleanor spent the rest of the day in a sort of daze. She moved through the house like a ghost, touching objects that had been part of her life for decades. She ran her fingers along the dining table where she had served thousands of meals. She stopped in front of the fireplace mantel, where the family photos were, the wedding with Arthur, the birth of each of her children, the birthdays, the Christmases, moments frozen in time of a happiness that was once real. What would happen to all these photographs, to all these memories? Nursing homes didn't have space for entire lives stored in boxes and albums. Everything that was her, everything she had built over 72 years, would have to fit into a small suitcase. As the sun began to set, staining the Alabama sky with oranges and pinks, Eleanor slowly climbed to her room. From the back of the closet, she pulled out an old brown leather suitcase, the same one she had used so many years ago when she and Arthur traveled to visit her sister in Atlanta. How young they were then, how full of life and hope. Eleanor opened the suitcase on her bed and began the painful process of deciding which parts of her life deserved to be saved. She carefully folded some dresses, her favorites, although they were already out of fashion and worn. She added her hairbrush, some personal hygiene products, an extra pair of shoes. She also included her family Bible, the one her mother had given her, the cover worn by decades of prayers. But there was something else, something Eleanor had kept secret for 5 years, since the day Arthur died. Something not even her children knew existed. Eleanor knelt beside her bed, ignoring the sharp pain in her knees, and reached her hand under the mattress. Her fingers searched until they found what they were looking for. A large, sealed, bulging envelope. She pulled it out carefully and sat on the edge of the bed, holding the envelope in her trembling hands. Inside that envelope was her entire future. Everything Arthur had worked so hard to secure. $4,200,000 in cash. A fortune her husband had accumulated slowly and patiently during decades of hard work, sacrifice, and saving. Money he had kept hidden from the authorities, from the banks, from everyone, because he didn't trust the system he had seen fail working people like them so many times. Arthur had made her promise never to tell the children about the money, not until she was sure they truly needed it, not out of greed, but out of love. He had whispered to her on his deathbed, "Use this money wisely, Eleanor. It is for your future, so that you never have to depend on anyone, so that you never have to beg for love or care." Eleanor had kept the secret faithfully. She had lived on her small pension. She had gone without. She had been cold in winter to save on heating. She had eaten the bare minimum to stretch every penny. But she had never touched Arthur's money. She had guarded it like a sacred treasure, waiting for the right moment. Now, as she looked at the envelope, Eleanor wondered if that moment had arrived. Her children wanted to send her to a nursing home. Maybe she could use part of this money to pay for a better place. A place where at least she had her own room with a window, where the food was decent, where the nurses were kind. But something in her heart told her no. Something told her it wasn't the time yet, that she should wait, that she should trust the promise she had made to Arthur. With trembling hands, Eleanor placed the envelope at the bottom of the suitcase. Underneath all her clothing, she covered it carefully, making sure it wasn't visible. Then she closed the suitcase and left it by her bedroom door. It breaks your heart to see a mother forced to hide her own security from her flesh and blood just to protect herself. But James, Sarah, and David have no idea that the burden they are trying to get rid of is actually holding the key to a fortune they could only dream of, and that ignorance is about to cost them everything. That night, Eleanor could barely sleep. She lay awake staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of her house, the creaking of the old beams, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. These were the sounds that had accompanied her for so many years. Sounds that would soon be replaced by the beep of medical machines and the groans of other elderly people in a home that would never truly be hers. Tears ran down her cheeks for hours. Eleanor cried for the life she was leaving behind, for the house that had been her home for more than 40 years, for the memories that would remain locked within these walls. But above all, she cried for her children, for the love she had given them unconditionally and that had never been returned in the same way. When the dawn of July 24th finally arrived, Eleanor got up with swollen, red eyes. She dressed with care, choosing her best dress, a light blue one that Arthur always said made her eyes shine. She combed her hair with care, gathering it into her usual bun. She applied light makeup, putting on a bit of pale pink lipstick. She wanted to look presentable. She wanted to maintain her dignity, even if inside she felt completely broken. At 8 o'clock in the morning, exactly as James had said, Eleanor heard the sound of a car stopping in front of her house. Her heart began to beat faster as she looked out the window and saw a black sedan parked on the street. The doors opened, and from them emerged her 3 children. James was the first to get out, He was a tall man with broad shoulders, dressed in an impeccable gray suit that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly pension. His hair, once black like hers, now showed gray at the temples, giving him a distinguished look. His eyes, however, were cold, calculating the eyes of a businessman who had forgotten how to feel genuine emotions. Sarah got out next. She was a slender woman, almost too thin, dressed in brand-name sportswear and huge sunglasses that covered half her face. Her blonde hair, platinum and obviously dyed, was pulled back in a high ponytail. She moved with the studied grace of someone who spent hours at the gym sculpting her body to perfection. But there was a hardness in her expression, a coldness that made Eleanor's heart shrink. David, her baby, was the last to get out. He was the youngest of the three, but he didn't look it. He had a prominent belly that hung over his belt, the result of too many business dinners and too much beer. His face was red and sweaty, even though it was barely 8 inches the morning. He wore an expensive golf shirt and khakis. He didn't even look at the house. Instead, he pulled out his cell phone and started typing messages. Eleanor opened the front door before they had to knock. She wanted to maintain her dignity. She wanted to show them she still had control over something, even if it was just when to open her own door. "Good morning," she said with a trembling voice, forcing a smile on her lips. "Come in, please. I'll make you coffee. I have some." "There's no time for that, Mom," interrupted James dryly, without even returning the smile. "We have to go. The nursing home is 2 hours from here, and I have an important meeting at 12. Did you pack?" Eleanor felt as if she had been slapped. Not even a good morning, not even a hug, just business, efficiency, haste. "Yes, my suitcase is upstairs," replied Eleanor, feeling her voice crack slightly. "It's just one suitcase, like you told me. I thought maybe we could talk first. Talk about this as a family." "We already talked, Mom," said Sarah, taking off her sunglasses and looking at her mother with eyes as cold as ice. "This is what's best for you. You can't take care of yourself alone anymore. At the nursing home, you'll have everything you need: food, medical attention, company. But I won't have you all," whispered Eleanor, feeling tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I won't have my family. This is my house, Sarah. You grew up here. There are so many memories." "Memories don't pay the bills, Mom," David chimed in without looking up from his phone. "Memories won't help you when you fall and break a hip. Memories. Couldn't you put down that damn phone for a moment?" Eleanor exploded suddenly, surprising even herself with the intensity of her voice. "Could you look me in the eye while you talk to me about ripping me from my home? Could you show even a little bit of respect?" David finally looked up, his eyes showing irritation more than regret. "Mom, we're not ripping you from anywhere. We're being practical. This costs money. You know, the nursing home isn't cheap, but the three of us have agreed to split the expenses because we love you and want the best for you." "Exactly," added James, crossing his arms. "So, instead of making us feel bad, you could at least be thankful that we're willing to make this financial sacrifice." Eleanor looked at the three of them, at these strangers who were once her babies, whom she had nursed, rocked to sleep, comforted when they had nightmares, cared for when they were sick. How had it come to this? How had love transformed into this cold financial transaction? "I'll go get my suitcase," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. She turned around and began to climb the stairs, each step heavier than the last. "Do you need help, Mom?" shouted Sarah from below, but there was more impatience than genuine concern in her voice. "I can do it alone," replied Eleanor, without turning back. She needed these last moments alone in her house. She needed to say goodbye in private to the life she had known. When she reached her room, Eleanor stopped at the door, observing the space that had been her sanctuary for so many years, the bed where she had slept next to Arthur for 40 years, the dresser where she kept her few pieces of jewelry and keepsakes, the small desk where she used to write letters to her sisters, the walls where photos of happy moments hung that now seemed to belong to a completely different life. "Goodbye," she whispered to the empty room. "Thank you for all the memories." She tried to lift her suitcase, which now truly weighed a ton. It was incredibly heavy, burdened not just by her belongings, but by the physical weight of Arthur's legacy. Inside was everything left of her life: some old dresses, personal hygiene items, her Bible, and $4,200,000 that her children didn't even know existed. an amount of money that could change their lives, that could solve all their problems, but that she had decided to keep secret, faithful to the promise she had made to Arthur. The suitcase was impossibly heavy. It felt as if it were filled with lead, not paper. Eleanor couldn't even lift it off the ground. Gasping for air, she had to lean her entire body weight backward just to drag it inches across the floor. Getting it to the landing took every ounce of strength she possessed. She had to push it over the edge of each step, letting it thud heavily down one by one, while she clung to the banister, trembling and sweating from the exertion. James was waiting for her at the foot of the stairs, looking at his expensive watch with impatience. Finally. "Come on, give me that thing." He yanked the suitcase from Eleanor's hands, grunting slightly at the unexpected weight. "Geez, Mom, what did you pack in here? Bricks?" He didn't wait for an answer, pulling it with a rough movement that almost made her lose her balance. "Careful with that suitcase," said Eleanor with more firmness than she felt. "It has things valuable to me." James scoffed. "Valuable? Mom, the only valuable thing you probably have are those old dresses that smell like mothballs. But fine, whatever you want." Sarah was already in the car, touching up her makeup in the passenger visor mirror. David was still on his phone, now leaning against the car, smoking a cigarette. "Aren't you going to come in to see the house one last time?" asked Eleanor with a hopeful voice. "It's been years since you were here. Maybe you'd like to see." "There's no time, Mom," repeated James mechanically, placing the suitcase in the trunk. "Besides, we're going to sell this house anyway. We need the money to pay for the nursing home." Eleanor felt as if the world stopped. "What? You're going to sell the house?" "Of course we're going to sell the house," said Sarah from the car, looking at her mother through the open window as if she were stupid. "What did you expect? That we'd keep it empty just for sentimentality? The real estate market is good right now. We can get a good price." "This house is my home," protested Eleanor, feeling tears finally beginning to roll freely down her cheeks. "Your father and I bought this house together. You were born here. All our memories are here." "Sentimentality doesn't keep the lights on, Mom," snapped David, throwing his cigarette on the ground and crushing it with his foot. "Besides, once you're gone, the probate process will be much faster if we don't have to wait for you two." "Well, you know," David muttered, revealing their cruel and flawed understanding of how inheritance worked. They were so blinded by greed, they hadn't even checked the laws on missing persons. "Look, Mom, I know this is hard for you, but you have to be practical. The house is worth money. Money pays for your care. Simple math." "Get in the car, Mom," ordered James, opening the back door. "We've already lost enough time." Eleanor walked toward the car with trembling legs. She turned one last time to look at her house, her home, the place where she had been happy, where she had loved and been loved, where she had raised her children with all the love in her heart. The windows looked at her like sad eyes, saying goodbye to her. "Goodbye," she whispered so low that no one else could hear her. She got into the back seat of the car, immediately feeling the contrast between the heat outside and the cold air conditioning inside. Sarah was in the front passenger seat. David sat next to Eleanor in the back, still glued to his phone. James took the wheel. The engine started with a soft roar. The car began to move, pulling away from the house, pulling away from everything Eleanor had known and loved. The air inside the luxury sedan was sterilized, cold, and smelled of expensive leather, a stark contrast to the scent of warm milk and baby powder that Eleanor associated with her children's youth. She looked at the back of James's head. She remembered the nights she stayed awake, helping him memorize history dates so he could get into college. She looked at Sarah's manicured hand resting on the door handle, the same hand she had held through Sarah's first heartbreak, wiping away tears until dawn. And David. She remembered selling her own mother's engagement ring to pay off his first gambling debt, a secret she kept from Arthur to her dying day. They were so close physically, yet an ocean of indifference separated them. They weren't taking a mother to a new home. They were disposing of an expired asset. Eleanor felt a scream building in her chest, not of fear, but of a heartbreaking question. At what point did my love become your burden? Eleanor looked out the window, watching the familiar landscape of her neighborhood give way to areas she didn't recognize. They passed parks where she used to take her children when they were little. They passed the school where they had studied. They passed the church where she and Arthur had been married, where they had baptized each of their children. Every place was a memory, every corner a story, and every mile they advanced was a mile further from everything she had known and loved. "Are you hungry?" asked Eleanor after a while, trying to break the heavy silence. "Could we stop to eat something?" "My treat." "I'm not hungry," replied Sarah, without taking off her headphones. "I ate before leaving," said David without looking up from his phone. "I already told you I have a meeting, Mom," added James with irritation. "There's no time for stops." Eleanor fell silent again. She looked at her wrinkled hands in her lap, noticing how they trembled slightly. She remembered when those same hands were young and strong, when they carried her babies, when they cooked delicious meals for her family, when they worked long hours cleaning other people's houses to be able to give her children everything they needed. Now those hands were old, useless, trembling uncontrollably. Like her, they had ceased to be necessary. The car kept moving forward, getting further and further away from the city. The landscape began to change gradually. Buildings gave way to open fields. Paved streets became two-lane highways. Traffic became increasingly scarce until it practically disappeared. Eleanor noticed that James had taken an exit she didn't recognize. Instead of continuing on the main highway, he was now driving down a secondary road that seemed to head into the remote backwoods. On both sides of the road, the thick Alabama pine forest had thinned out into a desolate stretch of dry scrub and logging trails. The air was thick with humidity and heat. "James," said Eleanor with a trembling voice, feeling a chill run down her back. "Why did you take this exit? This looks like an old logging road." "It's a shortcut," replied James without looking at her, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. But this doesn't look like it leads anywhere," insisted Eleanor, looking out the window at the increasingly desolate landscape. "James, please, let's go back to the main road." Sarah took off her headphones and turned to look at her mother with an expression Eleanor couldn't decipher. "We've all had that gut feeling when something just feels wrong, haven't we?" Eleanor is starting to realize that this isn't a road to a new home. It's a path to a betrayal no mother should ever have to face. But stay with me, because what they do next is colder than you can possibly imagine. There was something strange in her eyes, something that made Eleanor's stomach twist with fear. "What is going on?" asked Eleanor, feeling panic beginning to take over. "Where are you really taking me?" David finally put away his phone and looked at his mother. For the first time all day, he really looked her in the eyes, and what Eleanor saw in those eyes horrified her. There was no love there, no guilt, not even pity. There was only coldness, indifference, and something that looked dangerously like contempt. "Mom?" David began with a voice that tried to sound reasonable but only sounded cruel. "We have to talk to you about something." "The three of us have been talking," intervened Sarah, her voice sounding rehearsed as if she had practiced these words. "And we have reached a conclusion. The nursing home, well, it's very expensive. And frankly, none of us have the money to pay for it. But you said you were going to split the expenses," protested Eleanor, feeling fear turn into terror. "You said it was a sacrifice you were willing to make." James let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. "We lied, Mom. We told you what you wanted to hear so you would come with us without making a scene." Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then where are you taking me if not to the nursing home?" "Where?" The car slowed down and finally stopped in the middle of nowhere. Around them there was nothing but wilderness, dry, cracked earth, dead thickets, and a relentless sun shining in a clear sky. There were no houses, no other cars, no signs of civilization in any direction. James turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. "Here," said James simply, without emotion in his voice. "We're leaving you here." Eleanor felt as if someone had opened a trapdoor beneath her and she was falling into a bottomless abyss. "What? What do you mean?" Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and turned completely to look at her mother. Her face, which Eleanor had once thought was beautiful, now seemed like that of a demon. "Mom, let's be honest. You are a burden, a financial burden, an emotional burden, a burden in every sense. We don't have money to pay for a nursing home. We don't have time to visit you. Frankly, we have no interest in continuing to pretend we care." The words cut Eleanor deeper than any knife. But I am your mother. I raised you. I loved you. I gave my whole life for you. And now it's your turn to do something for us," interrupted David coldly. "You can make our lives easier by simply disappearing." Eleanor looked at the three of them, searching desperately for some sign of humanity, of love, of regret. But all she saw were hard, determined faces, without a shred of guilt or compassion. "You can't do this," whispered Eleanor, feeling tears roll down her cheeks. "Please, my children, my babies. You can't." "We aren't your babies, Mom," snapped Sarah, with venom in her voice. "We are adults with our own lives, our own problems, and you are no longer part of those lives." James got out of the car and opened the back door where Eleanor was sitting. "Get out," he ordered. "No," moaned Eleanor, clinging to the seat. "Please, don't do this to me. Please, I forgive you for everything. Just take me back. You can leave me at my house, and I will never bother you again. I promise. I swear." But James grabbed her arm with brutal force and pulled her out of the car. Eleanor screamed in pain as she fell to her knees on the hot, dry dirt. David got out on the other side and opened the trunk. He struggled to heave the heavy suitcase out, his face turning red with the effort, before letting it drop on the ground next to her with a heavy thud and disdain. "Here is your luggage, Mom. Everything you need." Eleanor got up trembling, her blue dress now covered in dust. She looked at her 3 children standing in front of her and saw complete strangers. Where were the children she had loved? Where were the babies she had rocked to sleep singing lullabies? Where were the teenagers who had told her, "I love you, Mom," before going to sleep every night? "Please," she begged one last time, clasping her trembling hands as in prayer. "Don't leave me here. I'm going to die here alone in this wilderness. Please, have mercy." "If you die, you die," said Sarah, shrugging with an indifference that froze Eleanor's blood. "Honestly, it would be easier for everyone. You aren't useful to anyone anymore, Mom. Your life no longer has a purpose. With the sale of the house, we'll have enough money to split between the 3 of us," added David. "And without you around, we won't have to worry about medical care or elder expenses. Everything is resolved in the best way." "How can you be so cruel?" cried Eleanor. "I gave you everything. I worked 2 jobs to buy you new clothes for school. I went hungry so you could eat. I cried when you cried. I laughed when you laughed. I loved you more than my own life. And that was your mistake," said James with absolute coldness. "You expected that love to be returned. But life doesn't work that way, Mom. People use whoever is useful and discard whoever isn't. That is the real world." The 3 got back into the car. Eleanor ran after it as much as her old legs allowed, screaming until her throat was raw. "Come back, please! Come back! Don't leave me to die here alone." But the car moved away faster and faster, becoming smaller and smaller in the distance, until it became a tiny dot on the horizon. And then even that dot disappeared. It is hard to fathom a cruelty deeper than this, abandoning the woman who gave you life just to save a few dollars. But as they drive away smiling at their victory, they don't realize they just left a multi-million-dollar winning lottery ticket in the dirt, and a survivor who isn't done fighting yet. Eleanor stood in the middle of the deserted road, alone, abandoned, with only her old suitcase for company. The silence around her was absolute, broken only by the sound of the dry wind kicking up small swirls of dust. She fell to her knees in the middle of the road and finally allowed the pain, the betrayal, the horror of what had just happened to overwhelm her completely. Her sobs echoed in the empty wilderness, the cry of a shattered mother, whose heart had been broken into 1,000 pieces by the people she loved most in the world. She didn't know how long she was there, kneeling in the dust, crying until she had no more tears left. The sun climbed higher and higher in the sky, becoming a white, relentless circle pouring its heat onto her without mercy. Finally, Eleanor wiped her tears with trembling hands and looked around. In every direction, there was nothing but scrubland and trees. There was no shade, no water, no shelter. If she stayed here, she would die. It was that simple. "Get up," she told herself with a hoarse voice. "Eleanor, get up. You will not die here. You will not give them that satisfaction." With great effort, she stood up. Her knees protested, her back ached. Every muscle in her body begged her to give up. But there was something inside her, some spark of the strong woman she had once been, that refused to go out. She looked at her suitcase lying on the ground. For a moment, she thought about leaving it there. Why carry it? It would only make her slower, more tired. But then she remembered what was inside. Arthur's money. $4 million. $200,000. A bitter laugh escaped her cracked lips. What good was all that money now? It couldn't buy her water in the middle of nowhere. It couldn't buy a car that would magically appear to take her to safety. It couldn't buy her children's love. But still, she lifted the suitcase. It was heavy, much heavier than she remembered, but she lifted it and began to walk. She didn't know where she was going. She simply chose a direction and began to put one foot in front of the other. The suitcase was an immovable anchor. Eleanor couldn't lift it. She could barely budge it. She looped her handkerchief through the handle to create a makeshift strap, leaning forward and dragging it through the dirt like a beast of burden. It carved a deep trench in the dry earth behind her. Her shoulder felt dislocated, and her arthritic fingers were locked in a cramp of agony. But the thought of Arthur's sacrifice forced her to take one agonizing step after another. It was all she had left. The sun was merciless, turning the air into a thick, hot mass that hurt to breathe. Sweat began to soak her dress, making it stick to her body. Her mouth was dry as sandpaper. One more step, she told herself, with every step she took. Just one more step, and then another, and another. The hours passed torturously. The sun reached its zenith, turning the Alabama countryside into an oven. Eleanor felt her skin burning, her lips cracking and bleeding. Blisters formed on her feet inside her worn shoes. Every breath was an effort. Every step, an agony. The suitcase weighed more and more. Several times she was tempted to drop it, to give up and let herself fall too. But something inside her, perhaps the memory of Arthur, perhaps her own wounded pride, kept her moving. Arthur, she whispered toward the scorching sky. Arthur, my love, help me, give me strength. Just a little more. She didn't know if she had walked for 2 hours or 5. Time lost all meaning under that relentless sun. Her mind began to cloud. Thoughts became confused. She began to see things she knew couldn't be real. A cool lake in the distance, a house with shade, Arthur walking toward her with open arms. No, she told herself, shaking her head to clear the hallucinations. It's not real. Keep walking. Just keep walking. Her legs finally gave out, and she fell to the ground hard. The suitcase rolled from her hands, bursting open on impact. Her clothes scattered on the ground, and there, in plain sight of anyone who might pass, was the envelope with Arthur's money. Eleanor looked at the envelope with glassy eyes. $4,200,000. A fortune her children would have killed to have. A fortune that now lay in the dust of the roadside, as useless as she was. She thought of her children, of James with his expensive suit and luxury watch, of Sarah with her perfect body and brand-name clothes, of David with his expensive meals and comfortable lifestyle. She thought of how they all constantly struggled with debts, with mortgages, with maintaining appearances of success and prosperity. And here she was, their elderly mother, whom they had abandoned to die with more money than any of them would see in their entire lives. If only they knew, murmured Eleanor, her voice barely audible. If only they had asked, if only they had been kind. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat. The irony was too perfect, too cruel. Her children had abandoned her thinking she was useless, a worthless burden. They would never know how wrong they were. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling consciousness beginning to slip away from her. The heat, the dehydration, the exhaustion, everything combined to carry her toward the darkness. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe it was time to give up, to let go, to reunite with Arthur wherever he was. I'm sorry, Arthur, she whispered toward the sky. I couldn't keep my promise. I couldn't use the money wisely. Forgive me, my love. She was about to let herself be carried away by the darkness when she heard a sound in the distance. At first, she thought it was another hallucination, another cruel joke of her dying mind. But the sound became louder, more real. The engine of a vehicle, with the last shred of energy she had left. Eleanor opened her eyes. Through the haze of heat and dust, she saw a dot approaching down the road, a vehicle. Someone was coming. She tried to scream, but her dry throat barely produced a whisper. Help, please. The vehicle got closer and closer until finally it stopped a few yards from where Eleanor lay. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck, covered in dust. The driver's door opened, and a man got out. He was a middle-aged man, probably about 50, with skin tanned by the sun and deep wrinkles around his eyes. He wore worn jeans, a flannel shirt despite the heat, and a worn baseball cap. His face showed surprise and concern upon seeing Eleanor lying on the ground. "My God!" exclaimed the man, running toward her. "Ma'am, what happened to you? What are you doing here in the middle of nowhere?" Eleanor tried to answer, but only managed to emit a weak moan. The man knelt beside her, checking her quickly with expert eyes. "She's dehydrated," he muttered to himself, "and probably has heat stroke. She needs water urgently." He ran back to his truck and returned with a bottle of water. Gently, he lifted Eleanor's head and brought the bottle to her lips. "Drink slowly," he instructed with a soft voice. "Small sips. That's it. Very good." The cool water touching her cracked lips was like paradise. Eleanor drank eagerly, feeling the vital liquid running down her dry throat. "Slowly, slowly," repeated the man. "Not so fast, or you'll get sick." When Eleanor had drunk enough, the man looked around, seeing the open suitcase and the scattered clothes. His eyes landed on the bulging envelope lying on the ground. "Is that suitcase yours?" he asked. Eleanor nodded weakly. The man began to gather the scattered clothes, folding them carefully and putting them back in the suitcase. When he reached the envelope, he hesitated for a moment. It was obvious from the weight and thickness that it contained a lot of money. Eleanor watched him, expecting him to take the envelope and run. Why wouldn't he? She was just an old woman abandoned in the wilderness. No one would know if he took the money. He could kill her right here, and no one would discover it. But instead, the man placed the envelope carefully inside the suitcase and zipped it shut. Then he returned to where Eleanor was. "Can you walk if I help you?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. Her legs felt like jelly, without any strength. "It's okay," said the man kindly. "I'll carry you. We have to get you out of this sun, or you'll die here." With surprising ease despite his age, the man lifted Eleanor in his arms as if she were a child. She barely weighed anything, he realized with sadness. She had lost so much weight in recent years that she was practically skin and bones. The man carried her to his truck and placed her gently in the passenger seat. He went back for the suitcase, put it in the back, and then got into the driver's seat. "My name is Frank," he introduced himself while blasting the air conditioning. "Frank Miller. I have a small ranch about 20 miles from here. I'll take you there." "Okay." Eleanor nodded, too weak to speak. Tears began to roll down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of despair, but of relief and gratitude. Frank drove in silence for the first few minutes, letting Eleanor recover. Sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places, right when we've lost all hope. Frank isn't just saving Eleanor's life here. He's restoring her faith in humanity. But as she heals, a fire is starting to burn within her. And trust me, her children aren't ready for the storm that is coming their way. The air conditioning and the water were working their magic, slowly bringing her back to life. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" asked Frank finally with a gentle voice. "How did you end up in the middle of the wilderness without water, without shade, without anything?" Eleanor swallowed, feeling her throat still aching. When she spoke, her voice was barely a hoarse whisper. "My children," she said simply. "My 3 children brought me here and abandoned me." Frank looked at her with disbelief. "Your children did this? Why?" "Because I'm old," replied Eleanor bitterly. "Because I'm a burden. Because it's easier to leave me to die on the side of the road than to pay for my care." Frank gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. That is monstrous. How can those people call themselves your children?" "I don't know," whispered Eleanor. "I don't know anything anymore." They drove in silence the rest of the way. Eleanor looked out the window, watching the desolate landscape begin to gradually transform. Some trees appeared, then fences marking properties. Finally, she saw buildings in the distance. Frank turned down a dirt road leading to a modest ranch. There was a single-story house painted white, but with the paint peeling in some places. A red barn in the back, some corrals with horses. It was simple, humble, but it looked like a home. A woman came out of the house when she heard the sound of the truck. She was of similar age to Frank, maybe a little younger, with brown hair in a braid and an apron tied around her waist. Her face showed concern when she saw Frank getting out of the truck. "Frank, who is she?" asked the woman. "What happened?" "Betty. This lady needs our help," replied Frank, opening the passenger door. "I found her on the road. Someone abandoned her there to die." Betty's face filled with horror. "My God, bring her inside quickly. We'll take her to the guest room." Between the two of them, they helped Eleanor into the house. The interior was cool and cozy, with old but well-cared-for furniture. It smelled of freshly baked bread and coffee. It was the kind of home Eleanor had once had, full of warmth and love. They took her to a small room with a bed covered with a handmade quilt. They laid her down gently, and Betty began to examine her with expert hands. "She is severely dehydrated," said Betty with concern. "And look at these sunburns. Poor thing. How long was she out there?" "I don't know," replied Frank. "I'm going to get her suitcase from the truck." While Frank went out, Betty continued caring for Eleanor. She took off her shoes gently, revealing feet full of bleeding blisters. She brought her more water and a damp cloth to clean her face. "Easy, honey," murmured Betty tenderly. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here." The kindness of this complete stranger made Eleanor break into tears again. Betty simply hugged her, letting her cry on her shoulder, stroking her white hair as a mother would with her daughter. There," whispered Betty. "Cry all you need to. Sometimes tears are the only medicine for a broken heart." Frank returned with the suitcase and placed it next to the bed. "Betty, she needs to see a doctor. Those sunburns look serious." "I'll call Dr. Wilson," replied Betty. "But first let me give her something to eat. Don't tell me you aren't hungry," she added, looking at Eleanor. "I can see you haven't eaten in a long time." Despite everything, Eleanor discovered that she was hungry. Her stomach growled at the mention of food. Betty smiled. "There it is. I'll be right back with soup. Soup cures everything. My mother always said so." The following days passed in a haze of care and recovery. Betty and Frank turned out to be angels in disguise. They fed her. They cared for her. They called the doctor who treated her burns and dehydration. They gave her clean clothes to wear while they washed hers. They offered her their home without asking for anything in return. Eleanor told them her full story during those days. She told them about her 3 children, about how she had raised them alone after Arthur died, about how she worked to exhaustion to give them everything. She told them about the day they picked her up, with the excuse of taking her to a nursing home, only to abandon her in the wilderness. Betty cried listening to the story. Frank clenched his fists with contained anger, but neither of them judged her. Neither questioned her story. Neither suggested that she had done something to deserve that treatment. "Some people are simply born without a heart," said Frank one night while they had dinner together. "And unfortunately, sometimes those people are family." "But family isn't just blood, Eleanor. Family are the people who are there when you need them most." Eleanor nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. These strangers had shown her more love and care in a few days than her own children had shown her in years. A week passed before Eleanor felt strong enough to think about the future. Weeks later, in the safety of the ranch, Eleanor finally unzipped the battered leather suitcase. It smelled of her old house of lavender and dust. Beneath the worn cotton dresses lay the heavy, sealed envelope. $4,200,000. Arthur's life blood. He had broken his back in the steel mills, saved every penny, denied himself every luxury, just to ensure she would never be helpless. He had known, perhaps before she did, that their children were hollow. Touching the money now didn't feel like winning a lottery. It felt like holding Arthur's hand one last time. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Her children had abandoned her to gain a few $1,000s from selling a house, walking away from a fortune that would have secured their dynasties. Greed had blinded them, but Arthur's love had built her a lifeboat, even from the grave. Frank and Betty had seen it. They knew it was there, but they hadn't asked a single question about it. They hadn't shown greed. They hadn't insinuated that they deserved a reward for saving her. That night, during dinner, Eleanor made a decision. "Frank, Betty," she began with a firm voice, firmer than she had sounded in a long time. "I have something to show you and something to propose to you." She took out the envelope and placed it on the table. With hands that no longer trembled so much, she opened it and revealed the contents. Frank and Betty's eyes went wide, seeing the amount of money inside. "Good Lord," whispered Betty. "Eleanor, where did all this come from?" "My husband Arthur worked all his life and saved it," explained Eleanor. "He didn't trust banks, so he kept everything in cash. He made me promise I would use it wisely, that I would use it when it really mattered." "And your children don't know anything about this?" asked Frank with disbelief. Eleanor shook her head. "I didn't tell them, and now I'm glad I didn't. If they had known, they probably would have killed me for the money instead of just abandoning me." Betty crossed herself at the horrible truth of those words. "I want to pay you," continued Eleanor, "for saving my life, for taking care of me, for showing me that goodness still exists in the world. I want—" "No," interrupted Frank firmly. "We will not accept a single cent of that money, Eleanor. We did what any decent person would do. We don't need payment for being human." "But you—" started Eleanor. "No," repeated Betty with equal firmness. "That money is yours, it's your security, your future. Don't give it away just like that." Eleanor felt tears returning to her eyes. "Then, let me stay here," she said. "Let me stay with you. I will pay you for room and board. I will help in the house however I can. I don't want to be alone again. Please." Frank and Betty looked at each other, communicating silently in the way only couples who have been together for a long time can do. Finally, both nodded. "You can stay as long as you want," said Betty with a warm smile. "But not as a tenant who pays as family." "As family," repeated Frank. "Our daughter went to college years ago and didn't come back. This house feels too empty without her. It would make us happy to have you here." Eleanor finally allowed herself to smile, a genuine smile that lit up her wrinkled face. For the first time in years, she felt she had found a place where she belonged. Months passed, and Eleanor flourished under Frank and Betty's care. She helped in the house as much as her elderly body allowed. She cooked with Betty, learning new recipes and teaching her own. She sat with Frank on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over the fields. She felt at peace, something she hadn't felt in a long time. But the past wasn't ready to let her go. 3 months after her arrival at the ranch, Frank returned from town with disturbing news. "Eleanor," he said with a serious expression, "I saw something in the local paper. Your children are looking for you." Eleanor's heart sank. "What? What do you mean?" Frank showed her the newspaper. In the missing persons section was a photograph of Eleanor, although it was an old photo from when she was younger. The headline read, "Family desperately searches for missing elderly mother." Eleanor read the article with trembling hands. Her 3 children had reported her missing to the police 2 weeks after abandoning her. They claimed they had left her at a nursing home, but that she had run away during the night. They were offering a reward of $50,000 for information leading to her whereabouts. $50,000, murmured Eleanor bitterly. How generous. They are willing to pay $50,000 to find me when they have $4,200,000 waiting for them. If they find me, do you think they know about the money? Asked Betty, who had been reading over Eleanor's shoulder. I don't know, replied Eleanor. But there is something else to this. You mentioned they wanted to sell my house. If someone reports that I am alive and elsewhere, they can't declare me dead and take control of the house so easily. Just when you think they couldn't sink any lower, the truth comes out. They don't miss their mother. They miss the signature needed to sell her home. But this greed is exactly the mistake Eleanor needs to turn the tables. Get ready, because the reunion they are asking for is definitely not the one they are going to get. Frank frowned. What do you want to do? Eleanor thought for a long moment. She could hide, keep living here on the ranch under a false name. But that would mean living in constant fear, looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the day her children appeared. I want justice, she said finally, with a voice that sounded stronger and more determined than she had felt in years. I want them to pay for what they did to me, and I think I know exactly how to do it. During the following days, Eleanor, with the help of Frank and Betty, formulated a plan. First, she went to the nearest town and spoke with the police, telling them the whole truth about what her children had done to her. She filed a formal complaint for attempted murder and abandonment of a vulnerable person. The detective assigned to the case, a stern man named Detective Barnes, listened to her with an increasingly grim expression. Mrs. Eleanor, he said when she finished her story, what you are describing to me are very serious crimes. If your children really abandoned you in the wilderness with the intention for you to die, we are talking about attempted murder. It is exactly what they did, confirmed Eleanor firmly. And I can prove it. Eleanor explained that although she was fading in and out for much of the time, she clearly remembered the words her children had said. She remembered how Sarah had said it would be easier for everyone if she died. She remembered how David had said they could split the money from the sale of the house without her. I will need you to come to the station to make a formal statement, said Detective Barnes, and we will have a doctor examine and document your injuries. The sunburns, the blisters on your feet, everything will serve as evidence." Eleanor did everything the detective asked. She underwent medical exams that documented every bruise, every burn, every sign of her terrible ordeal. The doctor who examined her stated that without Frank's intervention, Eleanor would have died within 24 hours. Detective Barnes also went to the ranch and spoke with Frank, who gave his testimony about the state in which he had found Eleanor. He photographed the exact spot where he had found her, showing how remote and desolate the area was. "You have a very solid case," the detective told Eleanor. "But I need to warn you, this is going to be very difficult emotionally. Your children are going to deny everything. They are going to try to make you look like a confused old woman with dementia. They are going to hire expensive lawyers. Are you sure you want to go through this?" Eleanor looked the detective straight in the eye. "I am absolutely sure. What they did to me was unforgivable. I deserve justice, and they deserve to be punished." "Then we will proceed," said Detective Barnes with a nod of approval. "But first we need to bring your children in for questioning. Would you be willing to confront them?" Eleanor thought about it. The idea of seeing James, Sarah, and David again terrified her, but it also energized her. She wanted to see their faces when they discovered she had survived. She wanted them to know they couldn't escape what they had done. "Yes," she said with determination. "I am ready to confront them." Detective Barnes organized everything carefully. He contacted Eleanor's 3 children under the pretext of having information about their missing mother. He asked them to come to the police station for an update on the investigation. James, Sarah, and David arrived at the station 3 days later, all dressed appropriately distressed with practiced expressions of concern on their faces. They entered the interrogation room together, expecting to receive news about their beloved mother. What they didn't expect was to find Eleanor sitting there alive, looking at them with eyes that burned with a mixture of pain and justified fury. The shock on their faces was absolute. James froze in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing without emitting a sound. Sarah took a step back, her face losing all its color until it was white as paper. David simply stood staring, unable to process what he was seeing. "Mom, finally!" exclaimed James, recovering his composure enough to act. "Thank God you're alive. We've been so worried looking for you everywhere." "Silence," interrupted Detective Barnes coldly. "Sit down, all 3 of you." The 3 children sat slowly in the chairs across from Eleanor, their eyes shifting nervously between her and the detective. "This is the moment we have all been waiting for. Look at their faces. The perfect mask of the grieving child is about to shatter into a million pieces. Eleanor is done being the victim. Watch closely as she takes back her power and delivers the truth they tried to bury." "Your mother has something to tell us about the day of her disappearance," said Detective Barnes, "or more accurately about the day you tried to murder her." "What?" Sarah jumped to her feet. "That's ridiculous." "We never sit down," ordered the detective. Sarah obeyed, but her eyes shone with barely contained panic. Eleanor looked at each of them slowly. James, with his expensive suit that couldn't hide the sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Sarah with her designer clothes and perfect makeup, which couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. David, with his smug expression, which was crumbling more with every second that passed. "July 24th, began Eleanor with a clear and firm voice. "You 3 came to my house. You told me you would take me to a nursing home. You made me pack a suitcase. You put me in the car." "Yes, exactly," intervened James quickly. "We took her to a very nice nursing home, but she ran away during the night, and let her finish," growled Detective Barnes. Eleanor continued, her voice never wavering. "But you didn't take me to any nursing home. You took me to the backwoods, to an abandoned road in the middle of nowhere, and there you left me to die." "That's crazy," Mom said David with a nervous laugh that sounded fake. "You're confused. Probably the heat affected your memory." "Age, sometimes. I am not confused," cut in Eleanor coldly. "I remember every word you said." "Sarah, you told me it would be easier for everyone if she died." "David, you talked about splitting the money from the sale of my house." "And you?" "James." Eleanor paused, looking at her eldest son with tears in her eyes, but with a firm voice. "You told me I was a burden. You told me people use whoever is useful and discard whoever isn't." The 3 siblings looked at each other with growing panic. The performances of filial concern had completely disappeared, replaced by fear and anger. "She's making it all up," said Sarah, desperately looking at Detective Barnes. She's an old woman. She probably has dementia or Alzheimer's. You can't believe we have medical evidence showing that Mrs. Eleanor was severely dehydrated when she was found, interrupted Detective Barnes. She had severe sunburns and bleeding blisters on her feet, consistent with walking long distances under the sun. The doctor who examined her said, without intervention she would have died in 24 hours. But that doesn't prove that we, James started. We also have the testimony of the man who found her, continued the detective, Frank Miller. He found your mother in an extremely remote area, miles from any civilization, without water, without shelter. How do you think she got there? She got disoriented, offered David weakly. She left the nursing home. She got lost. There isn't a nursing home or even a gas station within a 50-mile radius of that logging trail, replied Detective Barnes coldly. We checked the GPS logs from your vehicle, James. We know exactly where you stopped. You didn't drive to a care facility. You drove to a dead end designed for dumping trash. The silence that followed was heavy. The three children no longer knew what to say, what lie to invent. Their faces clearly showed their guilt. Eleanor stood up slowly from her chair. Despite her age, despite everything she had been through in that moment, she looked taller, stronger, more dignified than her three children combined. I want you to know something, she said, with a voice that resonated with authority. For 72 years, I lived my life trying to be a good person. I was a good wife to your father. I worked to exhaustion to give you everything you needed. I went hungry so you could eat. I cried in secret so you wouldn't have to worry. I loved you unconditionally, asking nothing in return, except that you love me too. Tears began to roll down Eleanor's cheeks, but her voice never faltered. And you repaid me by trying to kill me. You abandoned me in the wilderness like I was trash. You left me to die alone, scared, in agony, all because I was a burden, because it was easier if I disappeared. Sarah began to cry, but Eleanor suspected they were tears of self-pity, not genuine regret. But I survived, continued Eleanor. I survived because complete strangers showed me more love and compassion in one day than you showed me in years. I survived because I found people who reminded me that life is still worth living, that I still deserve love and respect. Eleanor leaned forward, looking each of her children directly in the eye. And now you will face the consequences of your actions, not because I want revenge, but because you deserve to answer for what you did. And because I want any other elderly person who is being abused or abandoned by their family to know they don't have to accept it in silence. She turned to Detective Barnes. I want to press formal charges against all 3. Attempted murder, abandonment of a vulnerable person, elder abuse, whatever charges apply. Detective Barnes nodded. We already have enough to arrest them right now. James, Sarah, David. You are under arrest for attempted murder and abandonment of a vulnerable person. You have the right to remain silent. What followed was chaotic. Sarah began to sob hysterically. David screamed that this was a mistake, that it was unfair. James tried to maintain composure, but Eleanor could see the panic in his eyes as the officers handcuffed them. Mom, please, shouted David as they took him away. Don't do this. We're your family. Eleanor didn't answer. She simply watched them be taken away, feeling a strange mixture of sadness for what could have been and satisfaction for the justice that was finally being served. When they were gone, Eleanor slumped into her chair, feeling exhausted but relieved. Detective Barnes sat beside her. You did the right thing, he told her softly. I know it wasn't easy. No, admitted Eleanor, it's never easy to send your own children to jail, but it wasn't easy that they tried to kill me either. The case of Eleanor against her 3 children became national news. Newspapers published sensational headlines. Children abandon elderly mother in wilderness. Elderly woman survives attempted murder by her family. Greed leads 3 siblings to try to kill their mother. The story resonated deeply with the public. People were horrified by what Eleanor's children had done. Social media exploded with outrage. Elder rights organizations took the case as an example of why stricter laws against elder abuse were needed. The lawyers for James, Sarah, and David tried to create a defense based on allegations that Eleanor had dementia and had invented the whole story. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. The medical exams clearly showed that Eleanor had all her mental faculties intact. Frank's testimony was unbreakable. Photographs of the place where she had been found showed how impossible it would have been for her to get there on her own. Furthermore, investigators discovered that the three siblings had serious financial problems. James was on the brink of bankruptcy, with gambling debts exceeding $200,000. Sarah had maxed out her credit cards, maintaining a luxurious lifestyle she couldn't afford. David owed months of mortgage and was about to lose his house. Everyone had a motive to want Eleanor dead. They could inherit and sell her house, split the proceeds, solve their financial problems. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Eleanor had to sit on the stand and recount her terrible ordeal again and again. She had to endure defense attorneys trying to paint her as a confused old woman who misunderstood her children's good intentions. But she remained firm, answered every question with clarity and dignity, looked the jury in the eyes, and told them the truth with a voice that never trembled. Frank also testified, describing the state in which he had found Eleanor. "I will never forget that image," he said with an emotional voice. "An elderly woman lying on the ground under the scorching sun, more dead than alive. If I had passed by there an hour later, it would have been too late." Doctors testified about Eleanor's injuries, confirming they were consistent with abandonment in extreme conditions. Meteorologists testified about the extreme heat wave that hit the region that day, with heat indexes soaring to a suffocating 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And finally, the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Johnson, Eleanor's neighbor, who had witnessed when the 3 children picked up their mother that fatal day. "I saw them arrive," testified Mrs. Johnson with tears in her eyes, "and I thought something was wrong." Eleanor was crying. The suitcase they carried was so small, and none of them hugged or comforted her. They treated her as if she were an object they had to move from one place to another. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty of attempted second-degree murder, criminal abandonment of a vulnerable person, and elder abuse. The judge, an older woman with a severe expression, looked at James, Sarah, and David with deep disgust. "In my 30 years as a judge, I have seen many terrible cases," she said, "but few have affected me as deeply as this one. You 3 took the woman who gave you life, who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, and abandoned her to die. Not in self-defense, not because she was a threat, but out of pure greed and convenience." The judge paused, looking at each of them. "James, I sentence you to 20 years in prison. Sarah, 18 years. David, 16 years. Furthermore, each of you will pay $50,000 in restitution to your mother for her pain and suffering." Sarah's sobs filled the courtroom. David cursed and had to be restrained by officers. James simply closed his eyes, defeated. There is a poetic justice in seeing those who sought to imprison their mother in a lonely death now facing a prison of their own making. Eleanor's journey was painful, but it reminds us that sometimes you have to lose everything to find the family and the peace you truly deserve. Eleanor watched them be taken away, feeling not exactly joy, but a sense of closure. Justice had been served. Her children would pay for what they had done. After the trial, Eleanor's life changed in ways she had never imagined. Her story inspired countless elderly people who had been victims of abuse by their families to speak up. She received thousands of letters of support from all over the country. Elder organizations asked her to speak at conferences, sharing her story as a way to raise awareness. But most importantly, Eleanor finally felt free to live her life on her own terms. She stayed living at the ranch with Frank and Betty, who had become the family she had always wished to have. Together they took care of the animals, cooked delicious meals, played cards at night, laughed at silly things. It was a simple life, but full of genuine love. With part of Arthur's money, Eleanor made some improvements to the ranch. They renovated the barn that was falling down. They bought some new horses. They updated Betty's kitchen, but Eleanor saved most of the money, following Arthur's advice to use it wisely. She also established a fund to help other elderly people in abuse situations. She worked with lawyers to create the Eleanor Foundation, dedicated to providing legal resources, shelter, and support to elderly people who were being mistreated by their families. "If my terrible experience can help save even one person from going through what I went through," said Eleanor in an interview, "then it will all have been worth it." A year after the trial, on a quiet autumn afternoon, Eleanor was sitting on the ranch porch with Frank and Betty, watching the sun set over the golden fields. The leaves on the trees had begun to change color, creating a landscape of oranges, reds, and yellows. "You know what's strangest?" said Eleanor thoughtfully. "After everything that happened, I don't regret anything." Betty looked up from her knitting with surprise. "How can you say that, Eleanor? Your children tried to kill you." "I know," replied Eleanor. "And that was horrible. But if they hadn't done it, I never would have ended up here. I never would have met you two. I never would have discovered that I could still be happy, that I could still feel loved and valued. In a strange sense, they set me free." Frank, who had been silent until that moment, spoke. "That requires incredible strength, Eleanor, to find something positive in the midst of so much betrayal and pain." Eleanor smiled, crinkling the corners of her eyes even more. "When you're 72 years old and you survive being abandoned in the wilderness, you develop a different perspective on what really matters in life." "And what is it that really matters?" asked Betty curiously. Eleanor thought for a moment, looking at the beautiful sunset. "Love matters," she said finally, "but not the love you give expecting something in return. Genuine, unconditional love, the kind of love you have shown me. Kindness matters, compassion matters, living every day with integrity and dignity matters." She paused, feeling tears forming in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not pain. "And family matters," she continued, "but not necessarily blood family. Family are the people who stand by your side when no one else is there, the people who value you for who you are, not for what you can give them. You two are my family now, more than my children by blood ever were." Betty put down her knitting and crossed the porch to hug Eleanor. Frank joined them, and the three stayed hugged like that while the sun finished setting. The courtroom doors have closed, and the silence has returned. But this time, the silence isn't in Eleanor's empty house. It's in the prison cells where James, Sarah, and David will spend the next 2 decades. They wanted to sell a house for quick cash. Instead, they traded their freedom for a lifetime of regret, knowing that the fortune they were so desperate for was within their reach the entire time. If only they had been kind. As for Eleanor, she didn't just survive, she thrived. She proved that you don't need DNA to be family. On that quiet ranch with Frank and Betty, surrounded by the peace that money can't buy, but that $4.2 million certainly helps protect, Eleanor finally found her true home. My dears, this story leaves us with a heavy question, and I really want to know your honest opinion in the comments below. Eleanor showed tough love by sending her children to prison. Do you think she did the right thing? Or does a mother's duty include forgiving even the unforgivable? Let's talk about it. If this story of justice satisfied your soul, please share it with a friend and subscribe to our channel for more powerful life stories. Remember, be kind, because you never know what someone is carrying in their suitcase. Until next time.